The scream that shattered my life came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. Not the kind of scream that makes you reach for a phone to call for help, but the kind that cuts through your chest like a rusty blade and leaves you wondering how you ever thought you knew the person making that sound. "You're suffocating me, Felix. I can't breathe with you constantly hovering over me like some pathetic puppy." Elin stood in our bedroom doorway, her blonde hair wild, her green eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than whatever had triggered this particular explosion. I was sitting on our couch, laptop balanced on my knees, working on code for my tech startup. The only thing I'd done wrong was ask where she'd been for the past 6 hours. "I just asked if you had dinner," I said, keeping my voice level. Years of dealing with Elin's volcanic temper had taught me that matching her volume only made things worse. "You said you'd be home by 7. It's past 3. See? There it is again." She threw her purse across the room, and it hit the wall with a satisfying thud. "You're keeping track of me like I'm some prisoner. I don't owe you a minute-by-minute breakdown of my life, Felix. We're not married. We're not even engaged. I can go wherever I want, whenever I want, with whoever I want." The last part hit differently. There was something in the way she said "whoever" that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But I kept my expression neutral, a skill I'd developed during my years as a software engineer dealing with impossible clients. "You're right," I said, closing the laptop. "You don't owe me anything." She seemed surprised by my calm response. Elin thrived on drama, on pushing buttons until she got the explosive reaction she was looking for. My refusal to engage clearly threw her off balance. "Good," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "I'm glad you finally understand that." "I do understand," I replied, standing up and walking past her toward the bedroom. "I understand perfectly." She followed me, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and did something I should have done months ago. I blocked her number. The little notification sound seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. "Felix, what are you doing?" "Getting some space," I said, opening the closet and pulling out a duffel bag. "Isn't that what you wanted?" For the first time since I'd known her, Elin was speechless. She stood there watching as I packed 3 days' worth of clothes, my laptop charger, and the few personal items that actually mattered to me. Everything else in this sterile, magazine-perfect apartment was hers anyway. "You can't just leave," she said finally. "We need to talk about this." "No," I said, zipping up the bag. "We really don't." The beautiful thing about being a software engineer is that you learn to think in systems. Every problem has a logical solution if you break it down into manageable components. Every bug can be traced back to its source and eliminated. Every crash has a cause. As I walked toward the door, Elin grabbed my arm. Her touch, which had once sent electricity through my entire body, now felt cold and desperate. "Felix, please. I didn't mean it. I was just stressed about work, and I took it out on you. You know how I get when I'm under pressure." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. She was beautiful. Stunningly, heartbreakingly beautiful. The kind of beautiful that made waiters stumble over their words and made other women hate her on sight. But beauty without substance is just an empty shell, and I was finally seeing the cracks in her perfect facade. "I know exactly how you get," I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. "That's the problem." I left her standing in the doorway of what had been our apartment for 2 years. She didn't follow me down the hall, didn't call after me, didn't try to stop me. By the time I reached the elevator, I could hear her bedroom door slam shut. The parking garage was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. I threw my bag in the back of my Honda Civic, a practical car that Elin had always been embarrassed to be seen in, and sat behind the wheel for a moment, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. My phone buzzed with a notification. For a split second, I thought it might be Elin, but then I remembered I'd blocked her number. Instead, it was an alert from the location sharing app we'd both installed months ago during what she'd called her transparency phase. The irony wasn't lost on me. According to the app, Elin was no longer at our apartment. She was at an address across town that I didn't recognize. I pulled up the location on my Maps app and felt something cold settle in my stomach. It was a trendy neighborhood full of expensive condos and upscale restaurants, the kind of place where investment bankers and trust fund babies like to play house. I sat there staring at the little blue dot that represented the woman I'd spent 2 years of my life loving, watching as it remained stationary at an address that definitely wasn't a girlfriend's place or a late-night diner. It was 3:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, and Elin was at some stranger's home. Except it wasn't a stranger, was it? You don't go to a stranger's place at 4 in the morning after having a screaming fight with your boyfriend. You go to someone familiar, someone who's been waiting for you. I started the car and drove out of the city, heading north toward Minneapolis. I had a cousin there who'd been telling me for months that his tech company was looking for senior developers. I'd always brushed off his offers, content with my small but growing startup in Chicago. But Chicago was Elin's city, full of her friends and her connections and her carefully constructed social network. It was time to build something new. The highway was empty except for the occasional truck, and I found myself thinking about systems again. Elin had treated our relationship like a game where she made all the rules and changed them whenever it suited her. She'd taken my stability for granted, assumed I'd always be there to absorb her moods and tolerate her casual cruelty. But every system has vulnerabilities, every network has weak points, and every user who thinks they're in complete control is usually the most vulnerable of all. By the time I reached the Minnesota state line, I was smiling for the first time in months. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Minneapolis, watching the morning rush hour crowd hurry past the windows. My cousin Jake had been right about the opportunities here. Within a week of arriving, I'd landed a senior developer position at a growing fintech company, and within 2 weeks, I'd found a decent loft apartment in a converted warehouse building. The apartment was nothing like the pristine showcase I'd shared with Elin. The brick walls were exposed, the floors were original hardwood that creaked when you walked, and the kitchen was barely large enough for one person. But it was mine, paid for with my own money, decorated according to my own taste. More importantly, it was a fortress. Felix Rourke? A woman's voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see a petite brunette with intelligent brown eyes and a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. I'm Maya Chen. We spoke on the phone about the consulting work? I stood and shook her hand. Maya was a freelance cybersecurity specialist who'd been recommended by a mutual friend. On paper, I'd hired her to help secure my new company's network infrastructure. In reality, she was going to help me build something much more interesting. Thanks for meeting me, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. I know the project I described was a bit unusual. Maya sat down and pulled out her laptop. Unusual is my specialty. You want to set up comprehensive monitoring on someone who's been harassing you online. That's actually pretty standard stuff. Right, I said, though we both knew it was more complicated than that. The target is my ex-girlfriend. She's been spreading rumors about me in our old social circles, trying to damage my professional reputation. I need to know what she's saying and who she's saying it to. It wasn't entirely a lie. In the 3 weeks since I'd left Chicago, Elin had been busy. Through mutual friends, I'd heard that she was telling people I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I'd been stalking her, that she'd had to get a restraining order. None of it was true, but truth had never been Elin's strong suit. Maya nodded, her fingers already flying over her keyboard. What's her name and what platforms is she active on? Elin Rydell. She's on everything. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. She runs a PR consulting firm called Rydell Communications. Got it. And you said there might be a secondary target? Sebastian Lund, investment banker, works for Morrison and Associates downtown. He's involved with her now. Maya's eyebrows went up slightly, but she didn't comment. Professional discretion was one of the reasons I'd chosen her. This is going to take some time to set up properly, she said after a few minutes of typing. I'll need access to some of your old accounts, anything that might still be connected to hers. Email, social media, shared services. I pulled out my phone and started going through the list. It was amazing how intertwined our digital lives had become over 2 years. Shared Netflix accounts, connected calendars, joint Spotify playlists. Each connection was a potential vulnerability in her carefully constructed online persona. There's one more thing, I said, lowering my voice. I want to know about her finances, bank accounts, credit cards, investments. Is that possible? Maya paused in her typing and looked at me directly. That's getting into legally gray territory. I can't hack into someone's bank accounts, Felix. That's federal crime territory. I'm not asking you to hack anything, I said. But if there were accounts that I legitimately had access to, joint accounts, shared credit cards, things like that, would you be able to help me understand what she's doing with them? A slow smile spread across Maya's face. Now that's a different question entirely. If you have legitimate access to accounts, then monitoring them is just good financial management. We spent the next hour going through the technical details. It turned out that Elin and I were still connected in more ways than I'd realized. The family plan for our phones that I'd been paying for. The joint credit card we'd opened to book a vacation that never happened. The shared cloud storage account where she kept her business documents. She's been sloppy about security, Maya observed, scrolling through the preliminary data she'd gathered. Most people are. They assume that just because a relationship ends, all the digital connections magically disappear, but data is forever. By the time Maya left, I had a comprehensive surveillance network being set up around Elin's online life. Every post, every comment, every financial transaction would be logged and analyzed. It was like having a window into her private world, and what I was seeing wasn't pretty. The rumors about me were worse than I'd thought. According to the screenshots Maya had already captured, Elin was telling people that I'd been emotionally abusive, that I'd threatened her, that she was afraid of what I might do next. She'd even posted cryptic messages on Instagram about escaping toxic relationships and finding the courage to speak your truth. But the most interesting discovery was Sebastian Lund himself. Your instincts were right about this guy, Maya said, pointing to her screen. He's been in her comments and DMs for months, way before your breakup. I studied the timestamps on the messages. Sebastian had been flirting with Elin since January. We'd broken up in March. The math was simple, but it still stung. There's more, Maya continued. I did some basic research on Mr. Lund. He's got quite the reputation around town. 3 different women have filed harassment complaints against him in the past 2 years. Nothing that stuck, but there's a pattern. She showed me the public records she'd found. Sebastian Lund was a predator who targeted women in vulnerable situations. He love-bombed them with expensive gifts and romantic gestures, then became controlling and possessive once he had them hooked. When they tried to leave, he made their lives miserable through legal threats and social manipulation. Elin has no idea what she's gotten herself into, I said. Maybe, Maya replied, or maybe they deserve each other. That evening, I sat in my new apartment with a glass of whiskey and my laptop, reviewing everything Maya had uncovered. The surveillance system she'd built was impressive, a real-time dashboard that showed me everything Elin was doing online, everyone she was talking to, and every dollar she was spending. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Elin's business was struggling more than she'd ever admitted. Her client list was shrinking, her accounts receivable were mounting, and she'd been using the joint credit card I was still paying for to cover her operating expenses. In the past 3 weeks alone, she'd racked up over $8,000 in charges. But the most interesting discovery was a group chat called Girls' Night that included Elin, her best friend Kira, and two other women I didn't recognize. The conversation history was a goldmine of gossip, complaints, and casual cruelty. Felix was so clingy, Elin had written just 2 days ago. I think he might actually be stalking me. He keeps calling from different numbers. That was a lie. I hadn't called her once since leaving Chicago. You should get a restraining order, Kira had replied. Document everything in case he escalates. Sebastian thinks I should hire a private investigator to prove he's been following me. Elin had responded. He's worried about my safety. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Sebastian was paranoid, Elin was lying, and both of them were about to discover that their digital footprints were a lot more visible than they realized. My phone buzzed with a notification from Maya's monitoring system. Elin had just made a purchase at an expensive restaurant downtown. According to the transaction details, she'd spent $300 on dinner for two. I pulled up Sebastian's Instagram account and waited. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, he posted a photo of an elaborate steak dinner with the caption, "Celebrating another successful day with my beautiful girl." They were celebrating their deception, toasting their lies, building their relationship on the foundation of my humiliation. That was their first mistake. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. I was reviewing the morning surveillance reports when Maya called with news that made my coffee taste better than it had in weeks. Your girl made a mistake, Maya said without preamble. A big one. What kind of mistake? The financial kind. She's been using that joint credit card to fund her business operations, right? Well, she just used it to pay for a romantic weekend getaway with Sebastian. 5-star resort in Wisconsin, couples massage, the works. Total bill was just over $4,000. I felt a familiar calm settle over me. The same feeling I got when I found the bug that had been crashing a program for weeks. That's interesting, but I'm not sure how it helps us. Check your email, Maya said. I sent you the documentation. That credit card is tied to a business account, Felix. She's been claiming personal expenses as business deductions, and now she's used company funds for a romantic getaway. That's fraud. I opened my laptop and pulled up the files Maya had sent. She was right. The paper trail was damning. Elin had been systematically misusing business funds for months, but the romantic getaway was the smoking gun that proved intent. What do you want to do with this? Maya asked. Nothing illegal, I said, but I think it's time for some financial housekeeping. The first step was simple. I called the credit card company and reported the fraudulent charges. Since my name was on the account, and I hadn't authorized a romantic weekend for my ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend, the charges were reversed within 24 hours. Elin's weekend getaway was suddenly very expensive, but that was just the beginning. The joint credit card had a credit limit of $15,000, and Elin had been treating it like her personal piggy bank. With Maya's help, I documented every questionable charge over the past 6 months. Business lunches that were actually dates with Sebastian, client meetings at expensive spas, marketing expenses that were clearly personal shopping trips. Then I did something that was perfectly legal but absolutely devastating. I canceled the card. The account holder has the right to close joint accounts at any time, the customer service representative explained when I called. Your co-signer will be notified by mail within 5 business days. 5 business days. That meant Elin would have almost a week of thinking she still had access to what she considered her emergency fund. A week of making plans and commitments based on money that was no longer available. The surveillance system Maya had built let me watch the chaos unfold in real time. It started on Thursday morning when Elin tried to pay for her usual expensive coffee and pastry at the boutique cafe near her office. The card was declined. She tried it again, thinking it was a technical glitch. Declined again. According to the location data from her phone, she spent the next hour at her bank, presumably trying to figure out what had gone wrong. The customer service representative would have told her that the account had been closed by the primary account holder, but it would take her a while to process what that meant. By Thursday afternoon, she was in full panic mode. "Something's wrong with my credit card," she wrote in the girls' night group chat. "Felix must have done something to it. This is exactly the kind of vindictive behavior I was worried about." "Can he do that?" Kira replied. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Sebastian thinks I should call a lawyer." Of course, Sebastian thought she should call a lawyer. Sebastian thought every problem could be solved with legal threats and intimidation. But this wasn't a problem that could be bullied away. This was simple mathematics. I'd paid for the account. I'd made all the payments, and I had every right to close it. The real panic started on Friday when Elin realized how much she'd been depending on that credit card. Her business checking account was nearly empty, her personal savings were depleted, and she had a payroll to meet on Monday morning. "I need to borrow some money," she wrote to Kira, "just until I can get this credit card situation sorted out. Maybe 5,000? "That's a lot of money, Elin. What happened to your business accounts?" "It's complicated. Cash flow issues. Please, Kira. I'm desperate." But Kira wasn't stupid. She could see the red flags as clearly as I could. When someone who's always bragging about their successful business suddenly needs to borrow $5,000 on a Friday afternoon, it usually means the business isn't as successful as advertised. "I wish I could help, but Tom and I are saving for the house down payment. Maybe Sebastian could help?" That was when things got really interesting. According to the surveillance system, Elin called Sebastian 17 times on Friday afternoon. He answered exactly 3 of those calls, and each conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. By Friday evening, his responses in their private text thread had gone from concerned to curt to non-existent. Sebastian Lund was many things, but he wasn't stupid. A woman who suddenly needed to borrow money was a liability, not an asset, and Sebastian only invested in assets. I spent Friday evening in my Minneapolis loft, watching Elin's world crumble through the lens of digital surveillance. It was better than cable television. But the best part came on Saturday morning, when Elin finally received the official notice from the credit card company. The letter explained that the account had been closed at the request of the primary account holder, and that any outstanding balance would need to be paid within 30 days. The outstanding balance was just over $12,000. "He's trying to ruin me," Elin wrote in a long, rambling text to Sebastian. "Felix closed our credit card and now I'm responsible for the whole balance. I can't pay this. I don't have this kind of money." Sebastian's response was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive deflection. "That sounds really stressful. Maybe you should talk to a financial advisor." Not, "I'll help you." Not, "We'll figure this out together." Just a suggestion that she handle her own problems. By Sunday, Elin was grasping at straws. She'd called her parents in California, but they were retired and living on a fixed income. She'd reached out to other friends, but none of them were in a position to loan her $12,000 on short notice. She'd even contacted a few ex-boyfriends, but apparently burning bridges had consequences. The surveillance system showed her spending hours on her laptop, probably researching bankruptcy lawyers and debt consolidation services. Her Instagram posts had gone from cheerful updates about her amazing new relationship to vague quotes about overcoming challenges and staying strong in difficult times. Sebastian, meanwhile, had gone radio silent. His last message to her was a brief, "Hope you get everything sorted out," followed by nothing but digital silence. By Monday morning, Elin was facing a choice: admit to her employees that she couldn't make payroll, or find another source of funding fast. According to Maya's monitoring of her business accounts, she chose a third option that was both desperate and stupid. She took out a cash advance on her personal credit card. "That's going to cost her about 30% interest," Maya observed when she called to give me the update. "She's basically paying loan shark rates to keep her business afloat for another week." How long can she keep that up? Not long. Her personal credit is already maxed out, and her business credit is tied to accounts that are behind on payments. She's in what we call a debt spiral. I should have felt guilty. A decent person would have felt some remorse for watching someone they'd once loved destroy themselves financially. But I kept thinking about that group chat, about Elin's lies and Sebastian's smug superiority, about the months of emotional manipulation and casual cruelty. This wasn't revenge, this was consequences, and I was just getting started. The beauty of a well-designed system is that once you set it in motion, it becomes self-sustaining. Elin's financial crisis was creating a cascade of problems that required no additional input from me. I could sit back and watch her reputation crumble under the weight of her own poor decisions. But I wasn't content to be a passive observer. "I've been thinking about your Sebastian problem," Maya said during our weekly check-in. We were sitting in a different coffee shop this time, one with better privacy and worse coffee. "Want to hear something interesting about his business dealings?" "Always." Maya pulled out a tablet and showed me a complex flowchart that looked like something from a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. "Sebastian works for Morrison and Associates, right? Investment banking, wealth management, that sort of thing. Well, it turns out he's been making some very interesting investment choices lately." "What kind of choices?" "The kind that might interest the Securities and Exchange Commission. He's been buying stock in companies right before his firm announces major deals involving those companies. Small amounts, spread across multiple accounts, but the pattern is clear once you know what to look for." I studied the chart more carefully. Maya had traced a series of stock purchases that Sebastian had made, using accounts registered to various family members and friends. Each purchase had been followed within days by a major announcement that drove the stock price up significantly. "This is insider trading," I said. "Technically, it's alleged insider trading," Maya corrected. "But yes, that's exactly what it looks like. The question is, what do you want to do with this information?" I leaned back in my chair and considered the options. Reporting Sebastian to the SEC would certainly ruin his career, but it would also take months or years to investigate and prosecute. I needed something with more immediate impact. "What if we took a different approach?" I said. "What if we made sure this information reached the right people at Morrison and Associates?" Maya smiled. "Internal compliance investigation, much faster than federal prosecution, and just as career-ending." "Exactly. Can you put together a comprehensive report? Something that looks like it came from a concerned whistleblower?" "Already working on it," Maya said. "But there's something else you should know. Sebastian isn't the only one with questionable business practices." She pulled up another set of files, these ones focused on Elin's PR firm. "Your ex-girlfriend has been very creative with her client billing. She's been charging multiple clients for the same work, inflating her hours and claiming expenses that don't exist." "How do you know all this?" "Remember that shared cloud storage account you still have access to? Elin's been backing up her business files there for months. Every invoice, every timesheet, every expense report. It's all there, and it's all documented." I felt that familiar calm settling over me again. Elin had always been careless with details, assuming that her charm and beauty would smooth over any inconsistencies. But numbers didn't care about charm, and spreadsheets weren't impressed by beauty. "Can you put together a similar report for her biggest clients?" "Way ahead of you," Maya said, pulling up another file. "I've already identified the 3 companies that represent about 60% of her revenue. If they all dropped her at the same time, her business would collapse completely. Within a week." We spent the next hour fine-tuning our approach. The reports needed to look authentic but not traceable. The evidence needed to be damning but not obviously stolen. And the timing needed to be perfect. "When do we pull the trigger?" Maya asked. I thought about it for a moment. Elin was already struggling with her cash flow crisis, and Sebastian was already pulling away from their relationship. But they weren't broken yet, just bent. I needed them to be completely shattered. "Next week," I said. "Let's give them a few more days to dig themselves deeper." Those few days were fascinating to watch. Elin's desperation was making her sloppy, and Sebastian's paranoia was making him cruel. Their text conversations had devolved into a series of increasingly bitter exchanges about money, responsibility, and commitment. "I thought we were partners," Elin had written on Tuesday night. "Partners support each other through difficult times." "We've been dating for 2 months," Sebastian had replied. "That doesn't make me responsible for your business problems." 2 months? "We've been together since January." "We've been talking since January, that's different." Even through the cold medium of text messages, I could feel Elin's heartbreak. She'd thrown away a stable relationship with me for a man who wouldn't even acknowledge the timeline of their affair. It would have been poetic if it weren't so predictable. By Wednesday, their relationship was hanging by a thread. Sebastian had stopped responding to her calls entirely, and his text messages had become monosyllabic. Elin, meanwhile, was alternating between desperate pleas for support and angry accusations of abandonment. "You're just like every other man," she'd written in a message that Sebastian never bothered to answer. "You want all the benefits of a relationship without any of the responsibilities." Thursday morning, Maya and I executed our plan. The report on Sebastian's insider trading went to the compliance department at Morrison & Associates, delivered through an anonymous email account that couldn't be traced back to us. The report was thorough, professional, and devastating. It included transaction records, timeline correlations, and a detailed analysis of the trading patterns. The reports on Elin's billing irregularities went to the CFOs of her 3 biggest clients, also delivered anonymously. Each report was customized to show how that specific company had been overcharged, double-billed, or charged for work that had never been performed. Then we sat back and waited for the dominoes to fall. Sebastian was the first to crack. By Thursday afternoon, he'd been called into a meeting with Morrison & Associates' compliance team. By Thursday evening, he'd been suspended pending investigation. By Friday morning, his access to company systems had been revoked and his office had been cleaned out. The surveillance system showed him making frantic phone calls to lawyers and frantically deleting files from his personal computer. But it was too late for damage control. The evidence was already in the hands of people who took financial crimes very seriously. Elin's collapse took a little longer, but it was more spectacular. Her first client dropped her on Friday afternoon with a terse email about irregularities in billing practices and immediate termination of services. The second client followed on Monday morning with a more detailed letter threatening legal action if the overcharges weren't refunded immediately. The third client waited until Tuesday to twist the knife. Instead of just terminating their contract, they demanded a full audit of all work performed and all expenses claimed. They also sent copies of their complaint to the Better Business Bureau and the local Chamber of Commerce. By Wednesday, Elin's business was effectively finished. Word had spread through the tight-knit PR community about the billing irregularities, and no reputable company would risk hiring her. The few clients she had left were demanding refunds, and her business bank account couldn't cover the claims. But the final blow came from an unexpected source: Sebastian himself. Facing his own legal troubles, Sebastian had decided that his best defense was to distance himself from anyone who might be seen as a co-conspirator. That included Elin, whose financial desperation and business problems made her a liability he couldn't afford. "I think we should take a break," he'd texted her on Wednesday night. "I need to focus on my legal situation, and I can't be distracted by relationship drama." Relationship drama. 2 months of an affair that had destroyed her previous relationship, and he was calling it relationship drama. Elin's response was a masterpiece of rage and heartbreak. "You coward! You're abandoning me when I need you most, just like you abandoned those other women. I should have listened to Felix when he tried to warn me about men like you." That last part was particularly satisfying, since I'd never warned her about anything. But people in crisis often rewrite history to make themselves feel better about their choices. Sebastian's final message was typically self-serving. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I hope you get the help you need." And then, nothing. No calls, no texts, no social media interactions. Sebastian Lund had ghosted Elin as efficiently as he'd seduced her. By Thursday morning, Elin was completely alone. Her business was ruined, her lover had abandoned her, her friends had distanced themselves, and her financial situation was desperate. The surveillance system showed her spending hours staring at her laptop screen, probably trying to figure out how to salvage something from the wreckage of her life. But I wasn't done yet. The real punishment wasn't the financial ruin or the professional humiliation or even the romantic betrayal. The real punishment was going to be the moment when Elin realized that none of this was an accident, that every disaster had been carefully orchestrated by the man she'd dismissed as a clingy puppy. It was time for the final act. Friday afternoon, I drove back to Chicago for the first time since leaving Elin's apartment 2 months ago. The city looked different somehow, smaller, less intimidating. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. I'd arranged to meet an old colleague at a bar downtown, ostensibly to discuss a consulting opportunity. But the real reason for my trip was sitting 3 tables away, hunched over a laptop with a glass of wine that had probably cost more than she could afford. Elin looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and a wrinkled blouse, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She was trying to maintain the appearance of a successful businesswoman, but the cracks were showing. I'd chosen this particular bar because I knew she came here when she was stressed. It was one of her power lunch spots, the kind of place where she liked to be seen conducting important business. Now she was here alone, desperately trying to salvage her collapsing company. "Felix?" My colleague Dave was staring at me with concern. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I said, turning my attention back to our conversation. But I kept one eye on Elin, watching her grow increasingly frustrated with whatever she was working on. After an hour, Dave left for another meeting, and I found myself alone in the bar with my ex-girlfriend. She hadn't noticed me yet. She was too focused on her laptop screen and her mounting problems. But I could see the stress radiating from her like heat from a fever. My phone buzzed with a message from Maya. "Package delivered. Check your email." I opened my laptop and found the file Maya had sent. It was a comprehensive dossier on everything we'd uncovered about Elin and Sebastian over the past month. Financial records, business documents, private communications, evidence of fraud and insider trading. Everything needed to understand exactly how thoroughly their lives had been dismantled. But Maya had added something extra. A detailed timeline showing how each revelation had been strategically released to maximize damage. It was a masterclass in systematic destruction, and it was all traced back to a single source: me. I printed the dossier at the bar's business center and walked over to Elin's table. "Hello, Elin." She looked up, and for a moment I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Then her expression hardened into the familiar mask of anger and superiority. "What are you doing here, Felix? Are you following me now?" "No," I said, sitting down across from her without invitation. "I'm here on business, but seeing you is convenient." I placed the printed dossier on the table between us. It was thick, maybe 50 pages of documents, screenshots, and analysis. Elin stared at it like it might explode. "What is this?" "Your life," I said simply. "For the past 2 months. Every lie you told, every scheme you ran, every bridge you burned. It's all here." She reached for the folder with trembling hands, then stopped. "I don't know what game you're playing, but—" "It's not a game," I interrupted. "Games have rules. This is just consequences." Elin opened the folder and started reading. I watched her face change as she processed the information, confusion giving way to understanding, understanding giving way to horror. "You did this," she whispered. "The credit card, the client complaints, Sebastian's job. You orchestrated all of it." I didn't do anything illegal, I said. I just stopped protecting you from your own choices. You ruined my life. No, I said calmly. You ruined your life. I just made sure you couldn't blame anyone else for it. Elin was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she flipped through page after page of evidence. Her business fraud, Sebastian's insider trading, their private conversations, her lies about me. It was all there, documented and cross-referenced and absolutely damning. Why? She asked. Why would you do this to me? I thought about that screaming match 2 months ago, about the months of emotional manipulation that had preceded it, about the casual cruelty with which she'd dismissed our relationship. You wanted space, I said. I gave you all the space in the world. You're completely alone now, just like you wanted. I never wanted this. I never wanted to lose everything. You didn't want consequences, I corrected, but consequences don't care what you want. Elin closed the folder and looked at me with something approaching desperation. What do you want from me, Felix? An apology? I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry for everything. I made mistakes, but I don't deserve this. You're right, I said, standing up. You don't deserve this. You deserve worse. But this is all I'm capable of. I left her sitting there with the evidence of her own destruction spread out on the table like a tarot reading. As I walked away, I could hear her crying. Not the angry, manipulative tears she'd used to control me during our relationship, but the genuine sobs of someone who had finally realized the true cost of their choices. Outside the bar, I called Maya. How did it go? She asked. Exactly as planned, I said. She knows it was me, she knows how I did it, and she knows there's nothing she can do about it. Any regrets? I thought about that for a moment. 2 months ago, I would have done anything to make Elin happy. I would have forgiven her lies, overlooked her cruelty, and convinced myself that love was supposed to hurt. Now I understood that love wasn't supposed to hurt. Respect wasn't supposed to be conditional. And trust, once broken, couldn't be rebuilt with apologies and promises. No regrets, I said. She made her choices. I just made sure she had to live with them. I drove back to Minneapolis that night, leaving Chicago and Elin behind for the final time. The surveillance system would continue monitoring her for a few more weeks, but I doubted there would be much to see. Her business was finished, her reputation was destroyed, and her social circle had abandoned her. Sebastian, meanwhile, was facing federal charges for insider trading. His legal bills would bankrupt him long before the case went to trial, and his career in finance was over. He'd probably end up selling insurance in some small town, telling anyone who'd listen about his glory days as an investment banker. They'd both survive, eventually. People like Elin and Sebastian always found a way to land on their feet, usually by finding new victims to exploit. But they'd never forget the lesson I'd taught them. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences have teeth. As I crossed the state line into Minnesota, I rolled down the windows and let the cool night air wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The revenge was complete, but more importantly, so was my liberation. I was no longer the man who'd tolerated Elin's cruelty in the name of love. I was no longer the victim of someone else's selfishness and manipulation. I was something new, something harder, something that couldn't be broken by beautiful liars and their empty promises. I was finally myself. 6 months later, I was sitting in my Minneapolis office, reviewing code for a new security application my team was developing. The startup I'd joined had grown rapidly, and I'd been promoted to lead developer with equity in the company. Life was good, productive, and refreshingly drama-free. Maya knocked on my office door, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone with interesting news. "Thought you might want an update on your old friends," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I told you to shut down the surveillance system months ago." "I did," but Google alerts are free and I was curious. She handed me a printout of a news article from a Chicago business journal. The headline read, "Local PR executive faces fraud charges in client billing scheme." I scanned the article quickly. Elin had been arrested the previous week on charges of wire fraud and tax evasion. Apparently, the client complaints we'd triggered had led to a broader investigation by the state attorney general's office. They'd found evidence of systematic fraud going back 3 years. "She's looking at 5 to 7 years if convicted," Maya said. "Her lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutors aren't interested. Too much evidence, too many victims." I set the article aside and took a sip of coffee. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, no sense of vindication. Just the mild interest you might feel reading about a stranger's misfortune. "What about Sebastian?" "Federal prison. 18 months, plus restitution and fines. He'll be out in a year if he behaves himself, but his career is finished. Last I heard, he was working at his brother's car dealership in Wisconsin." Maya studied my face, probably looking for some reaction, but there wasn't one to find. Elin and Sebastian had become irrelevant to my life the moment I'd walked out of that bar 6 months ago. "You know," Maya said, "most people would be celebrating right now. Your enemies are getting exactly what they deserve." "They're not my enemies," I said. "They're just people who made bad choices and got caught. The system worked exactly as designed." And that was the truth. I'd built a system to expose their lies and amplify their mistakes, but I hadn't created those lies or forced those mistakes. I'd simply removed the protective barriers that had allowed them to avoid consequences for so long. Maya finished her coffee and stood to leave. "Well, if you ever need to build another system like that—" "I won't," I said with certainty. "That was a one-time project." After she left, I returned to my code review, but my mind wandered to the bigger picture. The application we were building was designed to help small businesses protect themselves from fraud and embezzlement. It would flag suspicious transactions, identify unusual patterns, and alert owners to potential problems before they became disasters. In a way, it was the opposite of what I'd built to expose Elin and Sebastian. Instead of exploiting vulnerabilities, it would close them. Instead of amplifying mistakes, it would prevent them. I was building systems to protect people now, not destroy them. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, I wondered if it might be Elin, reaching out from whatever legal trouble she was facing. But the message was from someone much more important. "Dinner tonight, new restaurant downtown, my treat. Jennifer." Jennifer was a marketing director I'd met at a professional networking event. She was smart, funny, successful, and refreshingly honest about her ambitions and flaws. We'd been dating for 3 months, taking things slowly, building something real on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. She knew about Elin, not the details of my revenge, but the basic facts of a relationship that had ended badly. Jennifer had listened without judgment, offered support without trying to fix me, and made it clear that she was interested in who I was now, not who I'd been then. "Looking forward to it," I texted back. As I prepared to leave the office, I thought about the difference between the man who'd loved Elin and the man who was falling in love with Jennifer. The first man had been willing to accept cruelty in exchange for beauty, lies in exchange for excitement, manipulation in exchange for passion. The second man had higher standards. I locked my office and headed for the elevator, already thinking about dinner with Jennifer and the future we were building together. Behind me, the computer screens displayed lines of code that would help protect other people from the kind of predators who had once made my life miserable. It was good work, honest work, the kind of work that built things up instead of tearing them down. The elevator doors closed, and I descended toward the lobby, toward the evening, toward whatever came next. I was no longer the man who'd been broken by Elin's scream in the middle of the night. I was someone better, someone stronger, Someone who understood that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's building a life so good that your enemies become irrelevant. The doors opened, and I stepped out into the bright lights of the lobby, ready for whatever the future might bring.